I'm good.
Okay, so let's start off. Want to introduce yourself? I know you've got excellent credentials. Introduce yourself, and then we'll get to some questions.
You just want me to say something about my background or history?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, my name is Anna Salter. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a PhD in clinical psychology and public practice. I've worked with sex offenders and victims for probably close to 40 years. And I've written 8 books, 3 academic books and 5 mysteries. And I'm pitching another one.
Oh, you are. What's the newest one?
The newest one is actually a personal professional memoir. It
Okay.
talks about what it's like to work with these guys and, observations from decades of talking to them. Since 2014, I've interviewed at least 550 high risk, most of them high risk sex offenders for 2 to 4 hours each. And, hopefully I learned something during that time.
Yeah, I mean, in Predators, which is the book that I know, and I'm sure that most people know. Yeah, you were laying there how a lot of these guys, it's like a chill, right? You get like a chill down your spine when you talk to a lot of these individuals, right? Because it's just they're so cold in a way, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You get used to sort of the run of the mill stories,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always something that's just so egregious that it gets to you. You know, there was a man who beat a 3-year-old to death. I
Mm-hmm.
won't go into the graphics, but it was a pretty horrible thing, and it went on for days. And had a hard time with that interview.
Sure.
To be honest, I felt homicidal for most of it, and I'm usually pretty detached.
Yeah. But anyway, so let's maybe go back to not go back, but go to the beginning because I remember I either listened to it or I might have listened to another interview where you came out of, was it Harvard, correct? Am I have that?
Yes, I have a PhD from Harvard.
And you had no classes on um, sexual assault, right? They just didn't teach any classes on
Well,
that,
it didn't
right?
exist. Nobody
It
had
didn't
any.
exist. Yeah, yeah.
I got my degree in 1977, and they, you know, it was the silent period. There just weren't any courses or classes on sexual abuse or trauma or the impact of trauma of any sort on children and adults. So when I went to work in a community mental health center, I was astonished that it seemed as though every second kid had been
Mm-hmm.
physically abused or sexually abused or something like that. But I could adapt the techniques I'd been taught for other problems for victims. But then the court started sending offenders, sex offenders. And
Mm.
I remember, you know, I remember thinking, I don't think insight oriented therapy is going to do anything but produce sex offenders with insight. So I got a small grant and ran around the country looking at programs that had been treating sex offenders. And there were a few in different parts of the country. And I was very impressed by Northwest Treatment Associates in Seattle. I started writing a report on Northwest Treatment and how Vermont, which is where I got the grant from, how Vermont could adapt those techniques for use with sex offenders. It just kept growing and growing, and it ended up my first book, Treating Child Sex Offenders and Victims, A Practical Guide. And the thing was, there weren't a lot of books out there, so it kind of went everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say I remember, I was told, like, my mother grew up during a time, obviously, when there was no conception of marital rape even, right? Like it
Oh,
was just, you just couldn't think it could. And I remember being like an 80s and 90s kid, realizing that it wasn't until the 90s, and I was well into my like uh, 12, 13 when they passed like stalking laws. Like,
right.
what? That's not on the books. It's just now in the 90s. I mean, it doesn't surprise me now because I know how, uh, society views women and children. But at the time, I'm like, I would have thought that would have been on the books. What would you, so I suppose a good general as kind of a nice PSA, what would you say are the top misconceptions, urban myths, misconceptions that people have about victims, how they act, or how they should act? I know you talk about counterintuitive victim behaviors, and also sexual predators. Like, what do you think is the most egregious stereotypes, misinformation, or things that people should know?
Well, let's start with victims.
Okay.
People think that all victims are going to respond to sexual assault by screaming and running away. And victims of stranger assaults often do just that.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, victims in reality engage in a lot of counterintuitive behaviors after they're assaulted, primarily because they're stunned, they're confused, they're trying to sort out if they did something to bring this on. So somebody gets raped and finally gets away, and the guy texts her, and that's a real example, and says, you know, are something like, "Are you still alive?" Which wasn't very funny, given that he really had choked her almost to death.
Yeah.
And she said, laughing my ass off or something like that. And of course, this was used against her in court. It was 2:30 in the morning, and she's walking home, and this person she trusted has just assaulted her, and she is stunned.
Sure.
This particular college student wrote her brother afterwards that night and said, if you tell a guy, stop, no, stop, please stop, and you try to get away and he grabs you and you can't get away, and you realize, I can't get out of this. And she went on and on and on. She said, is that assault? I don't feel like I've been sexually assaulted, but it feels very weird. Well, her brother was quite clear that she'd been sexually assaulted. And what I say about that is, you go to bed at night, you look out your window, you see the same thing every night, roughly. Mm-hmm. So what happens if you get up one morning and you see a totally different landscape? How confused would you be?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem with acquaintance, family, boss offenders, is you know them in a social context, you're polite to them, social norms apply, you don't expect them to hurt you. And when they do, you have this clash in your response between the appropriate responses to social situations and the appropriate responses to sexual assault. People just get confused, and they try to get out of it by acting normal. Mm-hmm. And when the people of Boston went back to work and acted normal after the marathon, everyone called it Boston Strong. But when victims of sexual assault do that, people say it didn't happen. So one of the biggest problems is not listening to victims, assuming we know how they should feel. And when they don't meet our expectations, we say that it isn't true.
I've thought about that because when I read, you use that example, and I think it was an interview to explain counterintuitive victim behaviors. You say, well, suppose you're on a crowded sidewalk and you fall. You immediately jump up and say, I'm fine, even if you're hurting. So do you think that part of why people don't make that connection between other horrific events and still going on with their lives and sexual assault is similar to a kind of widespread commonsensical denial of false confessions. They think, "Well, I would never confess to something." In the same way where they think, well, if I was sexually assaulted, I would know. Do you
Exactly.
think that's part of it? Is that part of it?
No, I think it definitely is.
Okay.
I think you're very right. People have myths about how they would respond, and they apply these myths to the victims. Now, the thing of it is, this affects victims too, because they didn't think they would respond this way. They have their
Right.
own myths. So they're saying to themselves, like, it couldn't have been sexual assault. If it was, I would have known it. I would have run up. I ran off, gotten away, screamed, gone to the police. So it sows self-doubts in the victims as well. We have these myths about how people respond to trauma. We need to spend more time listening to people who've been traumatized.
And especially, would you agree, especially for acquaintance rapes, which are the most common because you've already given that person trust, right? You've already said, well, a certain degree of trust that you wouldn't associate with them unless you trusted them to a degree. Um, and so, does it also sow seeds of doubt in you think, well, no, I wouldn't associate with somebody that would do this. I must have been misremembering. Is that part of it too?
Yes, but also we all have our ideas about how predators operate. They jump out of bushes,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And an acquaintance rapist is not going to act like your conception of a rapist.
Hmm.
He's going to be nice to you
Hmm.
before and after the rape. He's not going to be nice to you during the rape. And in
Hmm.
that particular example, he really did choke her, slap her repeatedly across the face. She started to pass out. It was very violent, a very
Hmm.
violent rape. Afterwards, he started talking about he'd like to see her again and starts talking about his rooms as though nothing happened. So they gaslight you.
Hmm.
And gaslighting is when you just deny that something that just happened.
Hmm.
Now, the problem for people is reality is a consensual experience.
Hmm.
If I see the table in a room and nobody else in the room sees that table, I'm delusional or
Hmm.
hallucinating, one of the other. We define reality by the fact that other people see the same thing.
Right.
So it is things that things that aren't consensually validated belong to the half true, the is some kind of half reality where you can't get away from them, but you don't accord them the same degree of reality that you do things that everybody else acknowledges too.
Hmm.
And this is one way in which we are unknowingly harmful to victims. I mean, a kid who was orally raped by her father in the night goes to school and the teacher is chirping about, Ecuador or George Washington or who knows. And she acts as though nothing has happened. That's because she doesn't know anything has happened. I'm not blaming her.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the kid goes to the dentist after school and the dentist starts probing at her mouth and throws her into an affective flashback and she and acts like nothing has happened. So that all puts victims in this terrible bind where they can either deny their reality, pretend it didn't happen, and join the rest of us in this our consensual reality, or they can feel uh, utterly alone and different from everybody else. And I can't tell you how many victims have come in my office and said, I always felt different. I felt
Mm.
different from the other kids. There's a part of me that has always wanted to say, honey, I wish you were. I mean, we have millions of
Hmm.
abused kids. I wish I wish there was only one, you know. But I don't say that because I understand what she means. She means she lost her connection to the social reality after she was abused, and that she has lived a very solitary reality since then. My best friend in childhood, I never knew anybody who was abused. I lived in a small town, you know, as naive as they come. Uh, but my best friend, years, decades later, I went back and to the town, and she was visiting too. And she told me that she had been sexually abused by her uncle. And I was flabbergasted. And she said, "Do you remember we were walking along the street in the sidewalk in fourth grade, and you said, best friends don't have secrets from each other." And I said, "I don't have any secrets from you." She said, "I lied." And it was the beginning of seeing myself as someone deceptive.
Hmm.
That absolutely blew me away. I never had any idea at that point that victims saw themselves as deceptive. We know who is deceptive, but that they saw themselves. But there is a profound estrangement from the normal world that other kids are living in once a child has been sexually abused.
Yeah, I can speak on that because when I was 9, 10, yeah, I had a daycare provider um, that did a year-long sexual abuse, and I suppose, I mean, obviously you can continue in a second, but I suppose if I had any recommendation for people, it's two things. Is what kept me quiet for a year was the guy who abused me. He wasn't nicey. He was full on threats. It was full on,
Oh,
like full on, I'll burn your house down.
oh yeah.
And not only that, and I think this is a very important point. This is less so now, but obviously in the 90s, homosexuality was far less accepted than it is now. And so from a 10-year-old boy, it's like the worst thing you could be was gay.
Right.
And he knew that. And so he said, if you tell anybody, they're going to know and you can imagine. I think YouTube will probably not let this video be if I say it, but you can imagine. And yeah, that kept me quiet for a long time. And the deception part rings true because, at least for me, it was a shame thing looking back on it. I remember after the first incident, um, I came home and I ran immediately up to the bath. I stayed up there for hours, hours. And yeah, I would hide out, I would lose things. And yeah, so I think if I had to say anything about what to tell like kids, it's not just it's a yes, report it, but disregard the threats. Like they're gonna, and I got to be honest. The guy that, looking back, like he was skilled. I'm not making a moral judgment, just a pure intellectual, cunning,
Right.
manipulative judgment. He was good at what he did. Um, other brief side note, and then I'll like. But when I was reading Predators, it finally made sense. One individual during the court case that the defense hired, a guy named Christopher Barden. I
Ah,
don't know. Oh, you're familiar with this guy,
yeah.
and uh, outlandish claims about no such thing as sexual abuse. And I thought he was a fringe. I mean, I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong. I guess he is kind of a fringe, but less so when I read, I forget what part it was, when even now, like in the 2000s, contemporary people denying sexual abuse. And so I read that, and I was like, wow, now I get where this guy is coming from. I think he's wrong, clearly, but it's not just him. He comes from a tradition, as it were. Anyways, I don't mean to derail. Okay.
No, first of all, I am very sorry that that happened to you. And obviously, no kid should ever go through a year like that. I have to tell you, I have a lot of, I don't know if respect is the right word, but appreciation of how good some of these guys are. I really don't
Oh
think
yeah.
that kids stand a chance. And you're right, they're not all nicey nice. There's some of them that are very threatening and will actually kill the kids' animals and things like that. And it's very they seem so powerful to the children. It's very hard to protect a child against that, from that. It's hard to get them not to believe this guy, but we need to say it. We need to say, if anybody ever touches you in a way that, whoops, sorry.
That's okay.
Turn it off. Anybody ever touches you in a way you don't like, no matter what they say they're going to do if you tell, or no matter what they say, come and tell me. But I think that's another myth. Another myth is that parents can recognize these guys and tell who they are, and the longer you work with these guys, the more appreciation you have of how good some of them are in abusing kids. I interviewed one man who had he said approximately 1,250 victims of sexual abuse. And several times children tried to tell their parents, and their parents would say, John is a good man. John loves you. John wouldn't do anything like that. There must be some mistake. It was 1,200 kids before somebody told and the parents believed them. So one myth is you can recognize them. They have fangs, they have green teeth, they look like I don't know what. When they're the well-spoken daycare provider, pediatrician, psychologist, teacher, could be any profession. And the parents are reluctant to believe it. Because for one thing, then they have to realize that they can't tell and that they couldn't protect their child. That's very hard.
Yeah, that's my mother's continued, like whenever we talk about it, she still carries around a kind of guilt.
Yeah.
And I tell her, I've never blamed her. But she, I don't know, it is what it is. She carries it around, and I mean, I feel bad about it, but not much I can do other than just say she didn't know. You are right. I mean, he was, I think, 50 or 60 at the time, and I mean, a smooth operator, and it's like, yeah, I can see why he's gotten away with it. He's developed these skills that, pillar of the church, yada yada, that gives to a lot of people credibility. Not to me, but a lot of people that gives credibility. And yeah. Anyway, I don't want to dominate. Cody is also here. Cody, before she continues, do you have any other questions? Do you have any questions?
Not so much a question as really kind of a comment. One thing that kind of stuck with me from your book was the idea that you can't predict private behavior from public behavior.
Right.
I don't know why it didn't really kind of click before. It's kind of one of those things you kind of knew without knowing. But yeah, that really stuck with me. So if someone's act nice, that's the choice they're making. You can choose to be nice, and it doesn't necessarily mean they are nice.
All right, Gavin de Becker wrote, "Niceness is a decision, not a character trait." And I have always said that if I ever got a tattoo, I would put that on my forehead. Niceness is a decision.
Right.
Most people are nice, and they just fall right in with the herd. They can mimic the exact same behaviors that people have who are genuinely good people. So, I've come to believe that our best shot is prevention, and in the sense that, and I say this in predators, that we're all really busy, and when you're working and have little kids, you're busy. It didn't matter. I attended every soccer practice. I didn't trust the coaches. There's nothing wrong with these coaches. I just knew that of all the coaches, teachers, extracurricular people they would meet, there was a strong probability that one someday would not be legitimate, would be a sex offender. So I taught myself to score baseball, so I could hang around with the little league team, and be the scorer. And eventually I ended up being coaching little league. And the funny thing was, one night, it was in Madison, Wisconsin, where everybody has a PhD. And the three little league coaches were standing there. And we realized that we all had PhDs. None of us had known it. And one of the coaches said, "It's a wonder these children have won a single game." And I thought he was right. But we're too trusting. We drop kids off for practice. We just assume all the coaches are legitimate. We send them to extracurricular activities. We send them on overnight trips. We send them to overnight camps. Can't be doing all that stuff. We need to take a more active role in our kids' extracurricular lives.
Definitely.
Do you have anything else, Cody?
Let's think. I did have one question that just came to mind. It's escaping me at the moment.
Well, could I make a couple of random comments?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that disturbs me most today is the whitewashing of pedophilia. The field I'm in is increasingly wanting to call pedophilia minor attracted people, right? And that's very misleading, because it isn't abnormal to be attracted to post-pubescent adolescents. It's illegal to have sex with them if they're under 18, but they're post-pubescent, so they don't differ physically from adults. So, it's normal to be attracted to them. Being attracted to kids who are prepubescent, in my opinion, is entirely abnormal. But increasingly, those of us who believe that are lone wolves. Because in 2012, the American Psychiatric Association removed pedophilia as a mental disorder. It is not a mental disorder to be sexually attracted to kids. Pedophilic disorder is a mental disorder. But to qualify for pedophilic disorder, you either have to have molested kids, committed a crime, or you have to be uncomfortable being attracted to kids. And there aren't too many examples in DSM-5 where you have to commit a crime for something to be a mental disorder. I mean, if someone has command hallucinations to go kill someone, they don't have to do it for that to be an issue.
Right.
And this is a political decision, I believe. because the American Psychiatric Association has always been opposed to the civil commitment laws, and they did not like the fact, many of the members, that people were civilly committed as pedophiles. So they created this separate category. So if you haven't been caught, you can be a proud member of NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association. And if you're quite happy being a pedophile, you don't have a problem. One would think it's the people who were happy being a pedophile who had a problem, but not according to that. And there are increasing calls that we need to destigmatize pedophilia. And as one expert said, so these people can get the help they need. And my response was, if we destigmatize it, if it's perfectly normal, why would they go get any help? There's nothing wrong with them. My belief is pedophilia is an affliction.
Yeah.
People don't choose who they're sexually attracted to, whether it's men, women, children. We don't get to choose that. But we get to choose whether we act on it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are responsible for their behavior. When I lecture, I often say to people, how many people here have never had a deviant sexual thought? I say, raise your hands. You're delusional. There's psychologists outside with strong medication to help you. Then I say, everybody has, they've been attracted to their sister-in-law or the 16-year-old babysitter or somebody like that. It doesn't mean you proposition your sister-in-law or rape the babysitter on the way home. We make choices about our behavior. We don't have a lot of choices about our attractions. So my call is that first of all, it is an affliction. It is implicated in millions. It's the motive for child molestation and millions of cases. People struggle with it, and they do need help controlling it, but ultimately they are responsible for controlling it. But the zeitgeist is turning in a very different direction, that there's nothing wrong with being attracted to 5-year-olds. I'm sorry. No, I'm just not there. And that, we should, these guys don't have a mental disorder.
I mean, the way that you describe it, how they view it, it almost seems like they think that attraction falls on a very wide spectrum. So, which that doesn't seem right, because I think you had mentioned in either Reddit or I distinctly remember you saying your attractiveness can be affected by, let's say, alcohol. So you could go and get hammered in a bar and you might think somebody was attractive that sober you wouldn't have. But if a kid like a 5-year-old kid walked in, you wouldn't suddenly think,
right,
I find that kid attractive, unless you already had that predilection to find them attractive. So wouldn't that be a counterpoint to it falls? Yes, it'll fall on a spectrum, but like you said, it has to be post-puberty or in that time window, but not before, right? I just don't know why they would. So,
well, many pedophiles aren't attracted to adults at all, so they're not necessarily saying there's a wide spectrum for any one individual, but they're saying that there's nothing wrong with being attracted to kids. Actually, it's a terrible affliction for people who have it, and they struggle. I've interviewed guys where I've said, how much do you think about kids? And one guy said, oh, not that much, about half the day. I'm like, half the day? You're fantasizing about kids? Or another guy said, well, whenever I'm not busy doing something, I'm thinking about kids. Another guy said to me, until I got on medication, chemical castration, he said,
Mhm.
I didn't even realize I was thinking about them all the time. He said the fantasies were so constant. I just took them for granted. So what people say is, what some of these experts say is, we're not going to treat people respectfully unless we destigmatize it. That's not true. I
Right.
have treated every individual, including that kid, that guy who murdered a 3-year-old, respectfully. I've treated serial killers respectfully, mass murderers respectfully, because I think how you treat people has to do with who you are. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to do with who they are.
Mhm.
And to me, the people who raced around the prison in Florida when Ted Bundy was executed, yelling, "Burn, Bundy, burn," said more about themselves than they have said about Ted Bundy. We can treat everybody with dignity, and still say you've got a problem.
Right.
It's a serious problem, and you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, when you mention that, it seems to be along this like a train of thought where certain things that brings to mind you're called all like one could be called all kinds of phobics, like fat phobic, if they just point out, hey, it's not healthy to be overweight.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm not fat phobic for saying that. It's just empirically true. Like, obviously not a little bit, but if someone's like 900 pounds, like that's not fat phobic to point that out. And I can still treat that person with dignity and respect. So I
Right.
wonder if it's along that. I wonder if many other issues, which I know maybe it might not be your area, but I'm just making that association, which um, I didn't think about that we might have to think to normalize something, otherwise we won't treat the person with it with dignity and respect, which is not true.
Yeah.
Because we can still say if someone's paralyzed and need a wheelchair, that's horrible. You need a wheelchair, but we wouldn't treat them. I would like to think we wouldn't treat them horribly because of that.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. It's a strange thing. It's like, well, we don't feel like we can be nice to people unless we approve of them.
yeah,
I mean, that's what it comes down to.
yeah.
And my feeling is the best therapists walk a knife edge. They are respectful to the people they talk to, and frankly, there's no other way to get change anyway. But they don't minimize. They don't offer that respect by minimizing their behavior. And I feel like way too many sex offender therapists collude with therapists, with offenders. They've become offender advocates, and instead
Mm.
of holding offenders responsible, they see society as coming down on those poor people. And I I I I think that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So, it scares me quite a bit that there's such a
Right.
strong movement to destigmatize pedophilia, because if there's nothing wrong with being attracted to kids, what's wrong with actually molesting them? I think
Right.
that's the next step.
On this similar line, what do you think about just I'll just ping pong this off you and see what you think. What do you think about um like the right wing movement calling any kind of transgender people talking to kids as grooming? What do you make of that?
I
Because I
don't
always
know
thought it
what
was
people are talking about.
they just don't know what to call it. Yeah,
I don't think they know anything about grooming
of course.
to
So
say things like that. They seem to be saying that if you see a transgender person as a human being, if they read storybooks or something like that, it's going to make you want to be transgender. And I'm like, excuse me, is there some evidence for this? But there's never evidence for things, for that kind of bigotry. No.
Okay, so on that, what would be, so you said that we're not very good at detecting, let's say, deception. I know you have a whole chapter in your book about how not good we are at detecting deception. Like you can't monitor it with eye movement or
right.
So I guess my question is, are there ways that people can detect sex offenders? I'm not saying by just looking at them, but just if you're around them, because they're a way beyond the obvious of like coming right out and saying it. And the second one would be, what would be some very obvious signs of legitimate grooming? So what should you watch out for if somebody is actually grooming your kid?
Well, you can't detect sex offenders per se, but there are high risk groups and low risk groups.
Okay.
Men who have no girlfriends, no boyfriends, very little interest in other adults, and whose whole world revolves around Little League or mentoring or something else, and that's all they want to do. That's a high risk group. That is not to say that everybody in that group is a pedophile, but I equate it to you can die in a car at 30 miles an hour, but your odds of dying in a car are a lot greater at 130 miles an hour when you're drunk on an icy night. Now, somebody's going to live through that, I'm sure, but the probabilities are very, very different. So, yeah, I think you have to be very cautious around that. They won't catch everybody, but around that group of men who are obsessed with kids and don't seem to have any kind of normal adult social sexual life. Now, what has made that difficult is the priests, because even legitimate people who are not pedophiles are celibate in the priesthood. So that doesn't work when you're trying to sort through any kind of religious thing where celibacy is actually required. But it's a reasonable guide for other situations where people have choices about whether they have adult friends and enjoy adult activities or not. Now, what was the second part?
Oh yeah. So what would be, what are some signs that, so I suppose instead of saying grooming, what would be a case of where a parent should be worried if an adult takes an interest in their child? Because I would like to think, okay, there's a single mother and maybe there's an adult male and he takes interest in the kid. You might think, wow, this finally have some kind of like a adult male figure. So what would be not what would be, I know what would be, but from the parent's point of view, what are some behaviors that a predator would display towards a child that they're planning on doing something, as opposed to just they want to have a non-sexual relationship with the kid? I don't know if I articulated that correctly.
Yes, yes, you did. But
okay,
I think any single mother or anybody else should be very careful.
Okay.
If a man wants to be an adult figure for your child,
Okay.
Giving gifts, telling the kid how special he is, taking him for special outings, those things really don't occur very much, I'm sorry to say,
Yeah.
among legitimate people. They've got their legit men have their own families or their own friends or their adult interests or something like that. They may mentor or do one thing, but they don't zero in on one particular child and start showering that kid, writing that kid letters or texts or things like that. And I'd be very concerned about
Oh,
that
okay.
because now in families that doesn't work because uh, fathers legitimately give praise their kids, give them things, take care of them, all of this. So if it's a father, that you can't really use that. But I know that what single mothers want most often is a male figure for their child. But
Mhm.
it is very perilous territory, and I would be very cautious. I would essentially do things with the guy and the child as opposed to sending the kid off.
Yeah.
Especially, I had a mentoring case, a case against, I think it was Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
Mm.
And they let
I
this,
was a part of that. I was a part of that as a kid. So, okay.
well, it does a fabulous job for many kids, but
Mhm.
any child oriented institution is going to be a target for pedophiles
Yep.
because they can find legitimate ways to be around kids. And this guy was mentoring uh, kids. Well, this kid, and then he wanted him to spend the night at his house. Then he wanted to take him camping. Wait a minute. What's that got to do with mentoring? He was supposed to be you can mentor a child by taking them to a museum,
Mhm.
taking them to public outings, going out in the football field and throwing footballs with them. You don't need to have the kid for an overnight or a mentoring experience. And it's those things where people make special effort to get the child alone overnight without the parent that I would be concerned about.
Okay. So I think the other question not question, but the other observation I wanted to make that I sort of planned in my head was I was really taken aback by how even law enforcement officials are fooled by these individuals. So I remember I read the chapter on it, on how, I mean, it was first interesting to me to see how, now correct me if I'm wrong, you claim that prison doesn't really do much for these guys because that's just time they can spend planning and fantasizing, right? But
Yeah,
when
they
they get out,
often do. Yeah.
and then when I read about that for a lot of these guys, they will, again, correct me if I say anything that they will seduce like a female guard
Oh, yeah.
to kind of
Not the
gain.
pedophiles, not the ones who are only interested in children, but it's much more of a violent offender or a rapist tactic.
So if you could say more about that, and then also about the cases, and this blew me away, where the prison guards actually invite the offenders into their home. I'm like, what? So if you could expound on that, because that just blew me away. That,
There was a case like that. He was a
yeah.
baby-faced offender. He was in, I think, his early 20s, but he looked like he was 17, 18 years old. And he made a big show of being religious. So this very religious guard
Mm,
invited him to some kind of prayer group within the prison and became very close to this kid. And then his wife started visiting this kid. And when this offender was released, there was somehow they got permission for him to reside with the guard, even though the offender was a child molester in this case, and the family had a 9-year-old daughter. So he went to live there, and before long, since he didn't have a car or a driver's license, they were lending him their car, which was illegal, to go to work. And then they started going to court to adopt him.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, when one adult adopts another adult, and it has nothing to do with insurance or, anything like that, it's worth looking at that. But they're trying to adopt him while he's molesting the child. So eventually, he was an emotional sadist. His biggest thrill in life was letting people down. Was the moment he realized that he had tricked them. And I even said to him, "Well, you're emotionally sadistic. Are you physically sadistic?" And he said, "Oh no." He said, "Those things heal, but emotional abuse never heals."
Oh yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah.
So this interview is taking place within the context that I'm trying to make a film. I make some educational films on offenders about seduction of staff, which I never finished because nobody would give me permission to put it on camera.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we are filming at that point in time, and so this guy goes back to prison for this, and the family tries to keep seeing him.
Mm.
They want to come and talk to him. They want to talk to him. And he said to his psychologist, who was the one who told me about this, he said, "I feel like saying, what the fuck is wrong with you, lady? I molested your fucking daughter." I mean, he had a better reality sense than the family.
Yeah.
But when people get down on the family, I say the family's problem was that they took their religion seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And if he was as malevolent as he seemed to be, it it broke into all their beliefs that everyone can be redeemed, the prodigal son can always come home, everybody has good inside of them, and they were trying to cling to a religion that mattered very much to them. So,
I mean,
that's
and you
the
make the
story. But let me just tell you the reason that the interview it matters. So, I read all this, and before he comes out for the interview, I say he's going to withdraw permission. He's going to give an interview, and he's going to tell me all kinds of stuff, and then he's going to withdraw permission and for me to use the film. And I don't know if it's going to be today or next week or something, but I know, given his pattern, that's what he's going to do. And here's what I want you to do. I said this to the cameraman. If he withdraws permission, I want you to yawn, look bored, pack up, do not look upset. So I can't stop him from withdrawing permission, but I can stop him from getting a high out of how upset and disappointed we all are. But because that's his game.
Right.
He didn't withdraw permission that week. He waited a day. That day, he waited a week. And I got a message from the social worker saying he's worried about this, people seeing this, and he wants you to come up and talk to him. And he's thinking about withdrawing permission. I said, I'm not coming. I said, if he wants to withdraw permission, all he has to do is sign something that says he doesn't want it. But I am not coming up to be played like that. But that's the thing. That's the other thing. We see people do bad things to other people, and most people have enough narcissism to think he'll never do it to them. Look at the pattern. If he does it to everybody in his life, he's going to do it to me. That's the thrill he gets.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was fine. I mean, that hits on another. I mean, you already hit on a point, which is, I mean, you make it clear in the book that the easiest people to fool are religious people, precisely because that they think everybody can be redeemed. And if my memory serves, I mean, there are classes of people they just can't be, right? can't rehabilitate a psychopath. You just can't, right?
Well,
It's how they are.
I have not had very much luck in rehabilitating psychopaths. There are researchers who claim that it's possible to rehabilitate psychopaths, but
Is there any evidence though? Like a case of a rehabilitated psychopath?
well, they claim there is evidence, and I don't. In all honesty, I haven't looked at the research closely enough to see what I think about it. But the men who score high in psychopathy typically don't have a conscience.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean they're all serial killers or anything. They could be a Bernie Madoff type. It just means that whatever they want, and it may not be children, it may be money, investors, whatever they want. They don't really have any conscience at all about how they impact other people. And it seems to be kind of a major building block for change, is to have some kind of conscience.
Right.
Yeah.
Cody, what do you got?
Yes, I mean it's kind of there's a book I read not too long ago. It was called Games Criminals Play.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but yeah, it kind of ties in with your book. Actually, I thought pretty well, or the last half of it. Yeah. So do you do a lot of work with like COs and not training them to recognize any kind of games that might be, or any cons?
Yep. I've done a lot of training on how inmates con and fool people, and I don't have much faith in it. What I say to people is probably what is better than education for your staff is if you have strong bonds between them, so they're not turning to inmates for friendship, whatever the culture in the prison. How much people support each other and all that is probably more important than a slideshow, because I can show people this, and also these guys can have track records. I interviewed one guy who had been caught for compromising 3 staff members. He said to me, "I've done 6." I said that to the warden. He said, "Oh, I don't think so." And I thought I wouldn't bet against him. He's done 3. The third staff member knew about the first 2. I was testifying against this super incredibly violent offender who had actually worked out a plan to put staff members in a wood chipper and had gotten their home addresses. And he had seduced 6 staff members, and he seduced, I think it was 5 before then. When I was testifying, and he was brought to a jail so he could be in court for the testimony, he seduced a 6th one over the phone while I'm testifying, and the defense is saying what a changed man he is. So when people need companionship, when they feel not valued, when they feel like they've gained too much weight, or they have too many health problems, or their lives just don't feel good to them, they're much more vulnerable to this kind of person. And it doesn't matter if he's done it 5 times previously. It just seems not to matter. The guy, by the way, who said he had done 6 was a triple murder. He murdered his grandmother and 2 boarders that were personally kind of a clue that this is not a good human being. And he will do harm to other people. And often the staff predators are people with very violent pasts, because it was the most psychopathic group of people I ever interviewed. Every single one I interviewed like 9, and there wasn't enough conscience between all 9 to fit in a thimble. Well, I know we're about out of time.
Yeah, we want to respect your time. Cody,
Thank
do you
you.
have any other questions? Huh?
Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Appreciate
it was.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I mean, yeah, after I read your book, I knew I wanted to try to talk to you. I knew it because so it's really my honor. So to all of our listeners, viewers, yeah, pick up Predators. This is the old cover. I looked up the new cover. I think you have a new one, a new edition.
Well, they keep changing covers, but it's the same book. So
Yeah.
if you have one of them, you have the book. But
Yeah, yeah. So definitely get Predators. It's phenomenal, and you have over 40 years. You are the premier expert, right? Like you are the premier. So yeah, learn from the best. And we didn't even scratch. I mean, the surface. I mean, we didn't even get into parts of the book about like psychopaths, and some of that stuff is chilling, right? You even warned about that. You even warned about like
worse. Yeah.
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 yeah. And the really part that I think both Cody and I liked was the rose tinted glasses part, because Cody and I are kind of cynical, so we liked seeing the parts about how people are overconfident in their abilities,
Yeah.
and that leads to their downfall. I mean, it is what it is. So anyway, Cody, sorry. Cody, do you have anything else?
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that. Yeah, I mean, it's always great to hear you speak about this topic. And yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. And I appreciate your putting this kind of educational material out there, because I really do think there are a lot of myths, and that, getting some straight information is important.
Yeah.
100%. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yep. See
Bye.
you.